When I was a young kid, around, 10 I want to say, one of my favorite adult comedy— Yeah, we get it, you grew up watching Family Guy, who didn't? Just get it over with. Over the course of these totally serious Family Guy character analyses, one character I've seldom mentioned is Stewie Griffin, which is strange to consider as he's arguably the most recognizable character from the series. Aside from Peter, you'd think I'd get to a character like him over, I don't know, Joe Swanson. He's Family Guy's poster child. They're Bart Simpson, a character that took the world by storm when the show was in its heyday. I vividly remember my first exposure to Stewie coming from primary school. Each person in the class was asked to fill in a sheet where they'd have to draw their favorite things. And under favorite cartoon character, my South Park obsessed mind drew Kenny. But upon veering over at the other students' work, I noticed an odd pattern. A lot of people are drawing this weird football-headed baby. Who is this, and why is he suddenly the talk of the town? It was not long after when my uncle showed me Family Guy for the first time, and I recognized this kid as being the character that was so popular amongst my peers, and I could see why. Over time, I had grown incredibly fond of the show. I'd quote it all the time, trying my best to draw the characters in my notebook, and despite gravitating towards the pseudo-intellectual dog Brian Griffin, Stewie was always my number 2. He was a joy to watch alongside the other members of the Griffin family, joining in on their many misadventures, and over the course of the series, began starring in his very own. But when watching the show now, it's hard not to notice a drastic change in the character, arguably more so than any other resident in Quahog. The evil, sadistic baby hell-bent on world domination has changed greater than any other member of the Griffin clan I've looked at so far. And the weirdest part is, I don't really mind. This might be a first in this series of Family Guy character analyses, but I believe Stewie to be the first and only character who may have changed for the better, becoming a highlight of the show's later seasons before, yet again, falling into the same pitfalls we've seen from many others. Stewie went from an alright character to a genuine highlight of the series, to only again end up as yet another sign that the show has run its course. So over the course of this video, I want to discuss the many changes for the better we saw in Stuart Gilligan Griffin, before unfortunately building to his inevitable downfall. This is Stewie Griffin, evil to gay. I don't know, I gotta think of a title later. Some people may think these videos are a little pointless, and to that I say, ow. But really, does anyone care that much about the character development of Meg Griffin over the course of a show that's been going on for 25 years? Well, apparently, yes. However, in Stewie's case, I think it's more than justified. In a similar way to Brian, with the show directly calling out all of his worst possible traits that they had been slowly giving him over the course of 8 seasons, only to then proceed and exaggerate those traits to create a character who can only be described as a shell of their former self. Stewie is in a similar boat, although in not nearly as negative of a way. There are many people out there who outright prefer Stewie's character shift throughout the show, and honestly, I can see why and in a lot of ways agree with that sentiment, as the character change is something that the series itself is constantly pointing out. Them doing a handful of episodes which aim to acknowledge the difference in approach when it comes to writing him, and unlike Meg, whose character shift came off as incredibly jarring, due to child abuse jokes no longer being seen as all that funny, Stewie's was done so naturally over the course of the series that it's something a casual viewer may not even notice until the show itself points it out to them.
Where'd you get that?
Well, the Stewie from the past has a lot more gadgets and things than I do. I've kind of slacked off a little bit. How's the party?
I suppose, though, we have to begin by discussing who Stewie was, before going into what he eventually became, and how I think the writers did an excellent job of introducing this character change through a satisfying series-long setup and payoff. Stewie was a character very unique for your average family sitcom, completely taking advantage of the fact that the show is animated. See, in your average sitcom, the baby of the family is typically used as nothing more than a plot device. Any story revolving around them usually comes from the conflict they unknowingly create for the other characters. And when they're not doing that, they're just pushed off to the corner. They have as much to provide in a conversation as a houseplant. Stewie broke this mold by being given an actual voice and personality, and while it's not as if any of the family could hear what he's saying, aside from Brian and, well, sometimes the others, I don't know, they bend the rules a bit.
Yeah, I don't get it. So, can the family understand the baby, or what's the deal with that?
He wound up adding a lot more to the core family than, Maggie does. He ended up being so influential that this snarky talking baby archetype became incredibly overused. Many other cartoons trying to recreate what Family Guy did so well. While in most sitcoms the baby is typically tied to the mother's hip, Family Guy stood out in doing the complete opposite, Stewie's whole goal being to kill his mother, which he spends a majority of the first 5 seasons or so attempting to accomplish. While Season 1 seldom had episodes where Stewie took the spotlight, he frequently took up the role of the show's B-story character. While Peter Griff is getting up to whatever wacky shenanigans he can that week, we'll cut over to Stewie every now and then to see what he's up to, whether it be trying to invent a time machine or trying to prepare an attack on a man he believes is coming to drag him back into his mother's womb. I always find it to be a fun twist that Stewie was usually the one to unintentionally solve the other conflicts in the first season, such as his time machine eventually working and resetting the entire episode, or thinking he's found the man in white and disposing of him, the man in reality being a cult leader coming to kill Meg. And this was great in my opinion. It allowed what's usually such an unremarkable character in these shows to have more prominence and agency. Like he could just be doing his own unrelated thing for an episode and you don't have to question it because of his intelligence. We saw them use this to great advantage in episodes that tried to break him away from the family setting, and have him interact with other residents of Quahog. Like Damn It, Janet, where he falls in love with a girl at his preschool and tries his best to win her over, the whole gag being she's just a baby who can barely speak. Some of my personal favorite Stewie episodes, though, came from introducing a rival, such as Olivia. She unfortunately only got to appear in a handful of episodes, but they really stood out as being some of Stewie's best, giving him a proper rival to work off. Like I said, I think this iteration of his character was at his best when given someone to work off of. Season 1 sort of had the problem of just keeping him alone for a lot of his stories. All he can really do is talk to himself or his bear Rupert, who no shit, doesn't talk back. Whereas here, we have other characters that were on his level and could give him an actual challenge. Speaking of rivals, we also had Bertram, first making his appearance in an episode that revealed he had the prospect of becoming Stewie's brother, before eventually returning as the two wage war in the playground. And then, things immediately escalated with his final appearance in Season 9, as he travels back in time to stop Stewie from ever existing, an episode that ends with him being killed off permanently. It's so weird to think this guy only appeared in 3 episodes, it felt like way more. Still though, when Stewie wasn't doing his own thing or hanging out with Brian, who they eventually grew fond of pairing him with, his main shtick was wanting to kill Lois, a shtick which, over time, you could tell the writers were growing tired of. I can understand this completely. It must be rather limiting to have one of your main characters boil down to such a simple trait. There's not really much you can do with it beyond gags of his continued failed attempts, because it's not like he could ever actually succeed, right? Well, Stewie's evil nature came to a head in Season 6. You really got the idea that they had done everything they could with him. He's tried to kill Lois countless times. They've even done the spin on it where he starts to like her before reverting back to the status quo by the end. It was made clear that something needed to change. They needed to wean Stewie off his goal of world domination and move on to something else. Lucky for them, that's where Stewie's other main character trait came into play. Over the course of the past 5 seasons, the writers had begun to really fixate on the relationship between Stewie and his bear, Rupert. They'd slowly make more and more jokes about him envisioning the two in different romantic settings. They clearly thought it was funny because this would slowly lean into the joke of Stewie being straight up gay. That's an oxymoron. It was no longer limited to his imaginary relationship with his teddy bear. The gag was now used anytime they could. There was even a strange period where they tried to establish this bizarre romantic interest he had in Brian, which was completely abandoned for the exact opposite relationship.
I love you. What? What'd you say? Olive juice. Olive juice? Olive juice, you too.
In no time at all, this aspect of Stewie had overtaken any desire of his to take over the world. But they weren't just gonna abandon this goal without at least going out on a bang. Season 6 saw the premiere of what was, at that point in time, the most ambitious Family Guy special yet, the 2-parter Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie. This pair of episodes sees Stewie's more sadistic nature ramped up to 11, him actually following through and succeeding with his plan of killing his mother. I love how they present this, like they were finally acknowledging how stale the gag had gotten, and how shocked someone like Brian is to find out he actually went through with it.
Did you kill Lois?
Of course I didn't, Brian. Remember what you said? I'm all talk. I wouldn't possibly go through with it.
Obviously, there's no way the writers could go through with permanently killing off Lois, and so naturally it would have to end with some kind of reset. But I still love how they went about it. Instead of it simply being a dream or alternate universe of some sort, it's instead presented as being a simulation run by Stewie so he could see what the outcome of such a scenario would be. Said outcome being his death. Despite still having Family Guy's extremely comedic tone, I love how they play things genuinely straight at times. Stewie finally revealing his true self to the rest of the family as he begins to accomplish his goal of world domination. Which means, I guess, they could have hurt him the whole time? I don't know, they don't care, so neither will I. All this is to say, if they were to remove Stewie's most prominent character motivation, then I'm extremely happy they went out like this, going to the extremes they did with it ending on Stewie and Lois having their fight to the death. As she's forced to kill her own baby, it's surprisingly dark. The concept had been pushed to its limit, and so it makes sense why they'd remove this motivation from him. It's to be assumed that after realizing killing Lois had no positive outcome for him, he gave up on this goal, which left the writers with one question. Where do we go from here? Sure, they had the whole being gay thing, but there's hardly much new storytelling potential there, given he's a baby and all. And so their solution was an incredibly smart one. You know, just because Stewie doesn't want to kill Lois anymore doesn't mean he's still not an inventor. And so from this point on, Stewie episodes typically revolved around some new Jimmy Neutron invention of his. And then he's got to deal with whatever outcome it creates for him. Whether it be transporting the cast of Star Trek to his bedroom, making clones of he and Brian, getting stuck traveling the multiverse, or quite possibly their favorite Stewie plot device, the time machine. This was used to great effect in classic episodes like the Road Twos or even the one where he kills Bertram that I mentioned before. Or perhaps its greatest use in the episode where Brian gets hit by a car. Some of the most creative episodes of the entire show came as a result of them toning down his more evil side and focusing on the inventions themselves. Such as him accidentally sending time in reverse and having to fix things before he gets unborned. Or even the return of his simulation device where he wipes Peter and Brian's brains to see if they would naturally end up being friends. Stewie had opened up the opportunity for the show to do basically anything they wanted, no matter how outlandish of a concept they had the perfect excuse. Stewie invented it. I think this is when Stewie's character was in his prime, and thankfully it lasted a good 10 or so seasons. While I enjoyed Stewie from those first couple seasons, it's hard not to see him as a tad one-note. I can't even think of him without those massive pointy angry eyes that were tied to his entire character. I believe it was really the revival after Fox had cancelled the show that allowed Stewie to soar, the show returning with a 3-part movie focused almost entirely on him, where he has a near-death experience that gives him a more positive outlook on life, before eventually running into his future self and having to help him turn his dead-end life around. It put them in a scenario where Stewie had to open up more and seek a goal other than world domination, a trait which had already been slowly getting dropped after the whole Lois thing. Over time, this goal disappeared entirely. At a certain point, you couldn't even really describe Stewie as being evil. A little sadistic at times, sure, but I mean, who isn't? And even that was more so played for laughs than anything else. After season 6, they kept this depiction of Stewie with little to no deviation. However, in the show's 9th season, something interesting started to happen. They began to directly acknowledge this change. But unlike Brian being at the receiving end of Quagmire's roast, they used this as a way to elevate his character, rather than detract. The first example I can think of would be in the episode The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, in which we'll be focusing on the B story where, after Brian calls him out for not being all that much of a threat anymore, and losing his edge.
Alright, I think we're all set here.
Stewie ends up creating a device designed to channel his long-dormant evil side, which backfires as it winds up creating a clone of himself that contains nothing but his sadistic side, who begins running around town murdering everyone. No joke, this episode actually used to scare me when I first saw it as a kid. He's relentless.
We're going to run a few tests on...
It's a story like this which does a great job at acknowledging the change Stewie's character had seen, and actually does something with it, creating an extremely memorable episode. Certainly a lot more memorable than the Ass story where Meg falls in love with Joe or something, I don't know. It's also only a testament to how naturally they made the change. It wasn't even until seeing this episode for the first time that I even realized how drastically Stewie had changed. Season 10 also saw a similar concept be explored, but in a different way. After Stewie meets a similarly evil girl who rejuvenates his will to be bad, the two wreaking havoc across the entire world as she brings out the worst in him. Brian eventually tries to help him realize that he's gone too far, that instead of having the goal of world domination, he's instead just creating chaos for the sake of it, which upsets Penelope greatly, leading to her trying to kill him as Stewie jumps in to defend his friend, the two having a massive battle which eventually leads to her exit from the series. Damn, all Stewie's best rivals are only run for like 3 episodes, what the fuck? By the way, this is unrelated, but if you ever want to question the direction humanity is taking, I implore you to look up one of these Family Guy clips online and just scroll to the comments, because you'll either find people genuinely trying to dissect the battle strategies of these two cartoon babies, while others are just there like, listing their TV guide for that night. It's episodes like these which shows that the writers were still interested in exploring Stewie's more evil side, but more so as a reflection of the ways in which he's changed, and I think that was really clever. Unfortunately, that too is quite the limiting story arc. Like, there's only so many ways you can explore this topic before running out of unique things to say and do with it. And so, as a result of this, the writers, did nothing. Instead of trying to take Stewie in a new direction from here, all I'd say they've done is grown complacent with his current iteration. I'd argue from season 10 onwards, Stewie has become completely stagnant as a character. You know, now we have Diet Stewie. A perfect example of this comes from the most recent episode, which is the Christmas special I looked at, where Brian informs Stewie he might be on Santa's naughty list.
Oh, Brian, the old Stewie was on the naughty list. I haven't tried to kill Lois for I don't know how long.
Like I said in the video, if Stewie wanting to kill his mother is a plot point that gets resolved in season 6, then it's confusing to try and bring that back up as something he's referring to in season 23. For context, there's about a 17-year gap in between these episodes, yet they expect you to believe this is still something that would be on his mind because, well, it's Stewie. That's one of his defining traits. I mean, look, it's on his Wikipedia. And it's not like they've done anything new with the character in the past 10 seasons worth exploring instead. Like I mentioned before too, there's nothing to even say with it anymore. Whereas evil Stewie or Penelope gave him an actual threat to deal with, almost as if he's fighting a manifestation of his older self. All we see in the Christmas special is him trying to be overly nice before Meg accidentally shoots herself with his ray gun, and he's upset about it. Okay, with Stewie especially, the show just seems to not be able to acknowledge how long it's been, since they've had these prominent plot points that were resolved decades ago, literally. Like, are we
Mario, what brings you to Cowhide? It's time to give the movie mama.
I can see it because it's not like he's done anything since then. At first, it's kind of fun and exciting to see them do things with others comparing Stewie to his older self, which ends up sparking some kind of news story for him. But after 17 years, it's like, yeah, he's not evil anymore. Is this some sort of revelation? I mean, there's only so many times you can acknowledge it before it's just the norm. Even his inventor side has been toned down, which I think is mainly a result of the show wanting to focus way more on the mundane sitcom scenarios, with none of the outlandish adventures Family Guy used to thrive on, at least not as frequently. Anytime Stewie does decide to do something scientific once in a blue moon, it's gotta be treated as some kind of event, like when he and Brian shrunk themselves, or when he Frankensteined Rupert to life. This used to just be every Stewie episode. Now it's only when they can make a cool promotional poster out of it. I mean, when was the last time we've even had a road to? 8 years? It feels like an entirely different show, which only makes it more bizarre when they try to return to elements that concluded in season 6. We're at a point where Stewie has spent more time reminiscing about the time in which he was evil than the time he actually spent being evil. And it only serves to dampen my feelings towards new Stewie, as it only highlights what little potential he has. Now Stewie's whole character boils down to, he's snarky. That's kinda it. This was never made more clear to me than in the season 16 episode, Send in Stewie Please. Now, I'm not exactly sure what I thought my first time watching this episode, but wait a second, I made a video reviewing every Family Guy episode. Wait, look at this.
I know nothing revealed here will ever apply to the series again. And it also comes off like they're trying to present Stewie as this ultra deep badass. Again, I can appreciate them trying to do something new, but unlike Dog Bites Bear, it doesn't work as a standalone. It's mostly just boring and try hard.
Damn, okay, no, I pretty much feel the same way, so you're just gonna have to listen to me repeat myself for a second. Just with better audio mixing. I've watched this episode more than I care to admit, and it's because I could never quite understand how I felt about it. Like, it's not a bad episode or anything, just an extremely confusing thing to do with his character. One where I can understand and even appreciate the thought process behind it, but ultimately I feel it feels due to not really acknowledging any aspect of Stewie's character, aside from the tree it's created specifically for this episode. The entire thing features Stewie in a child psychologist's office after getting in trouble at school, in which he attempts to put on a mask and not let his therapist in, by instead trying to draw all the attention to his insecurities, before quickly breaking down as we learn more about the facade he puts on just to get through the day. See, this would be interesting and give us more insight on his character, but nothing really said here applies to the Stewie we've seen throughout the past 16 seasons, and spoiler alert, has no consequence on how his character is handled in the future. The episode may as well take place entirely within its own vacuum. Nothing explored here matters, and it's because they don't know what to focus on. And that's only because at this point in the series, there's nothing to Stewie. This seems like the kind of concept that would have been much better suited for Brian, you know, didn't he see a therapist at one point? The attempt to highlight him being different to other kids, which makes him lonely, also why he tries to mask his feelings by the constant insults. But all of this just ends up leading to a dumb gag.
This isn't even how I really talk. This is how I talk. The accent is nothing more than an affectation.
The only notable reference they make towards his actual character is nothing more than a throwaway meta joke.
Well, I like to talk about world domination. Some people don't think I talk about it enough anymore, but mind your own beeswax is what I say to them.
In the end, it just comes off extremely pretentious, trying to present Stewie as being way more deep and badass than he's actually been for the past 10 years. Which, hey, I mean, suppose it worked out. This episode resulted in the writer getting nominated for some award. Huh, what a hack. What other shitty episodes has he written? Wait a second. You're telling me this guy has written some of my favorite episodes of the entire series? Brian, Portrait of a Dog, Brian and Lev, Road to Rhode Island, Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, Brian and Stewie. This guy even wrote Mr. and Mrs. Stewie, the one with Penelope. This guy's a Family Guy freaking legend. How did he go from writing this string of bangers to the episode where Stewie gets himself pregnant with Brian's babies? What happened? I don't know, maybe it was due to the gap he took on writing episodes to focus on creating his own show. The Prince. Wait a second. It all makes sense now. Okay, well, to be fair, the writing was on the wall. The Prince is already just a blatant Stewie Griffin clone. Horrible impression and everything.
Excuse me, do you have any tea that doesn't taste like piss?
Guess who voiced him? It only makes more sense now knowing the show was created by a guy who knew Stewie arguably more than anyone. Although that series failed to take off for a plethora of reasons which I've already gone into years ago. But I'm of the firm belief that if Stewie started out in Family Guy the same way he's approached now, then I don't think his character would have been anywhere near as much of a pop culture icon as he once was. Mostly because his current character is so reliant on just name-dropping pop culture.
I hope you get those Adele tickets. You deserve them. It reminds me of the therapist's office Bethany Frankel goes to on The Real Housewives of New York City. I don't mean to name drop, but I kind of know Andy Cohen. He originally wanted me for the Rachel Zoe project, but I said no, so they went with Brad. That could have been me on Fashion Police with Melissa Rivers 14 times a year. Although I did hear Ryan Reynolds visited him, something to do with Deadpool, I guess, so it's not all horrible. Oh, look, you got your Dunkin' Donuts coffee. You might as well tattoo "Can't Afford Starbucks" on your forehead.
I'm just gonna stop there because that was only 2.5 minutes into the goddamn episode. And it's not like that was never a part of his character, all the pop culture references. But at this point, that's all there's left to him. Gay jokes and referencing celebrities. Like, that is Stewie now. He's just... well, he's the Prince. Ironically, the character who was so unique that he spawned an army of imitators has devolved to the point of being just as uninteresting as said imitators. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Stewie is a bad character now. Far from it. In fact, I think he's the best out of all the Griffins in the current seasons. But it's hard not to find his character so directionless. I mean, hey, at least they've attempted to do new things with him every now and then. They introduced a new rival for the first time in ages called Doug, but he offered so little and played off Stewie so poorly that they wind up just killing him off screen after a few appearances because fans hated him so viscerally.
I mean, that's the story I would have told this week, but whatever. Oh, and Doug died in a commuter plane crash this morning.
I have nothing else to say about him. I'm glad he's dead. Other than that, they've made a slight return to highlighting the fact that Stewie is a baby and building episodes around that. Their big 300th special was all about his first word. They did one where he gets jealous of Chris for having Rupert before him. We see a lot more of his school life. They even did an episode where he gives himself the personality of an actual baby. But I think what all this is missing is that balance they once struck so well. That Stewie could be a baby while also doing these crazy sci-fi stories that gave him actual adventures to go on. Because nowadays it always feels like it's either one or the other. It's either he's a baby going through your typical baby plot with no spin whatsoever, or the fact that he's one gets pretty much forgotten altogether as he's treated like a mini adult by all the characters around him. It's either one or the other, rarely both. Some of my favorite Stewie episodes from recent times combine these traits to do a story that can only work with a character like Stewie, such as Dog Bites Bear where Brian kills Rupert and has to take Stewie up a mountain to spread his ashes, which shows that balance is still something these writers are clearly capable of accomplishing. This is not that recent of an episode, but I also think Road to the North Pole did this excellently. Playing off the plot of him still believing Santa's real, and turning out Santa actually is real, with Stewie's whole goal being to murder him. A Christmas special like that feels way more Family Guy than... well, like I said, he makes a vain attempt to be nice, Meg dies, he's sad about it, so then Meg's brought back. At the end of the day, though, I ultimately think the biggest issue plaguing Stewie now is that sense of directionlessness. Yeah, he's still a fun character. He's just unfortunately rarely given anything interesting to do. Either way, I still like you, Stewie. I just want to see you return to form, embrace what made you unique. Because otherwise, you're just going to continue becoming like every other smarmy talking baby archetype you once inspired. I suppose with that, there's only one major Family Guy character left. And I've certainly saved the best till last, so join me, probably a few months from now as we look at Family Guy's greatest case of character assassination. Cleveland Brown.